Hello, everyone. Welcome to Romantic Reads. We're so excited to have you joining us today to talk about books that feature love and relationships and kind of have an early Valentine's Day celebration. So, welcome. All right, before we get started with the presentation, I did want to orient you to a few features of our Zoom environment today. So this afternoon's program is in a webinar format. So that means that your camera and microphone are not active. So although you can see and hear us, we can't see and hear you, and you can't see each other. So you can just kick back and relax and hear about some really fun books. But if you do have some questions or comments for us, you can feel free to enter those into the chat. Those questions and comments will go just to us, the panelists, and we hope to have a little bit of a Q&A time at the end of the presentation. So if you have a question or comment, you'll find the little chat icon. It looks like a little speech bubble with the word chat underneath it. You may need to wiggle your mouse or lightly tap on your screen in order to get the icon bar to appear. And then just go ahead and click on chat, and a box will open where you can enter your questions and click enter. And like I said, we will get to questions at the end of the presentation. So today's presenters are myself, Sarah. I work in adult services in Reader's Advisory, which is kind of like matchmaking for books and readers. We also have Peggy here today from Saks and Lindsay from Saks, and then also Harry who works with me in adult services. You can find the books that we are talking about today either in print or in various e-media formats in our library's catalog or through Hoopla or Overdrive. Overdrive is available as the Libby app. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So my first pick is Loving versus Virginia, a documentary novel of the landmark civil rights case. And this is a novel in verse, and it's inspired by the romance, marriage, and landmark Supreme Court case to protect that marriage of Mildred and Richard Loving. Now, novels in verse seem to be a bit more common in teen lit for some reason, and although this book was written with a teen audience in mind, I really think it will appeal to adults as well. It follows Mildred, who is Black, and Richard, who is white, from their early schoolyard relationship through their decision to get married in Washington, D.C., their jail time when they returned to Virginia, and the court battle that they finally won. And they won it not just for themselves, but for all of us to have the freedom over who we love, regardless of race. The poetic form really captures the range and depth of emotion of such an important romance for our country. There are excerpts from court documents, news clippings, historical photos, and maps all sprinkled throughout the book. And additionally, the artwork by illustrator Strickland has a kind of mid-century feel about it. And yeah, it really adds to the atmosphere and draws you in. So if you want a love story where love truly wins the day, and definitely if you liked and watched the 2016 movie Loving, then definitely check this one out and don't let its teen designation deter you. Okay, next up I have White Houses by Amy Bloom. This book is historical fiction inspired by the relationship between First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and journalist Lorena Hickok, who was known by friends and Eleanor as Hick. They first met in 1932 while Hick was covering Roosevelt's first presidential campaign, and friendship eventually bloomed into a romance. Hick was even invited to live in the White House for a while because she lived in Eleanor's quarters, private quarters, because as Eleanor said, oh, there's just so much room, so you have to move in. FDR also had extramarital affairs, so this did occur on both sides of the relationship. And both his affairs and Hick were kind of open secrets in the White House and in DC social circles. There is a nonfiction book about this, Eleanor and Hick by Susan Quinn, that I would recommend if you want a more historical detail about the true story. But I think this novel fills in a lot of the details and the emotions and feelings, allowing the reader to feel both the intimacy and the stresses that such a forbidden relationship and the secrets necessary to protect it must have caused. Bloom has Hick narrate the story, And she's just this really brash, fully realized character. And she shows us how easy it was to fall in love with such a great woman as Eleanor Roosevelt, but how hard it was to be in love with her given the pressures of the, dynamics of politics and social mores of the day. All right, next up I have Eric Jerome Dickey, Sister's Sister. So Dickey just recently passed away, unfortunately, at the age of 59 after a really long illness, and this came as a really big shock to the literary world. He wrote contemporary fiction, often featuring strong, relatable African American women, which he had stated in the past that he felt were underrepresented in fiction at the time that he first started writing. After news of his passing broke, author Roxane Gay noted that, quote, his were some of the first novels I ever read about Black people that weren't about slavery or civil rights. He was a great storyteller, end quote. So I thought it was a really good time to highlight his work and to go back to the very beginning. Sister Sister was his first novel, and it was published in 1996. And it centers on Valerie, her sister Inda, and Chiquita, Valerie's boyfriend's other woman. Valerie and Chiquita become friends, which may seem strange until you realize that they probably have a lot in common, given that they were dating the same man. So they become even closer when they discover that he was engaged to a third woman. So lots of juicy romantic relationships. But at the heart of the novel are the friendships between the women that are very realistically portrayed by Dickey. There is also a lot of fun in this novel in that it allows you to peer 30 years into the past and recall all of the cultural touchstones and dating habits of the 1990s. So take this opportunity to discover or rediscover the work of Eric Jerome Dickey. Okay, next I have The Authenticity Project by Claire Pooley. This novel begins with an elderly, washed up artist named Julian who writes in a little green notebook about his wish that he and others could connect more authentically. He then leaves it for the right person to stumble across it in a cafe. And that person is the cafe's owner, Monica, who finds it. And she's really touched by the sentiment in the notebook. So she adds her own entry about her life, about her loneliness and her wish to find someone to love and to start a family with. And then she leaves it for another stranger to find. And the book passes hands several times, traveling the world and creating links and relationships between a group of former strangers. Friendship and purpose and even love starts to bloom, all sparked by this little green notebook. This is a really heartwarming story, but it also doesn't shy away from difficult topics like depression and addiction. And in fact, it's the first novel by Pooley. She was previously known for her blog, Mummy Was a Secret Drinker, which was then turned into a memoir called The Sober Diaries. So she's no stranger to themes of recovery and reconnection, and there is that aspect in this novel as well. And the theme of today's virtual program was love and relationships, and this book really captures all aspects of that and not just romance, like in a strict sense of the word, because love and connections of all kinds can truly be inspirational, and that's what this novel is about. Okay, and then each of us are going to talk today about two forthcoming books, so books that are coming out later this year. And the first one that I have up is Whereabouts by Lahiri. She is an Indian American author who has written some lyrical, reflective fiction about the Indian American experience, particularly first and second generation immigrants, in books like The Namesake and Interpreter of Maladies. But in 2016, she published a memoir about her family's time living in Rome and her love affair with the Italian language. Whereabouts, she actually has written several things in Italian, but Whereabouts is the first novel that she wrote in Italian and then translated into English. And it is set in Italy, and it follows a woman who's feeling somewhat stuck in her life through the events of a year as they change her perspective. She tries to connect with her mother, who's been isolated since her father's death. She's ambivalent about coworkers and friendships. And then there's this him who haunts her thoughts both comforting and kind of unsettling. So it promises to really capture the Italian atmosphere with descriptions of piazzas and fountains in the seaside. And I just really think it's going to be interesting to see how writing in Italian and the translation process transform or informs Lahiri's lovely lyrical prose. I find that as someone who writes, really interesting that this sort of writing first in a foreign language and what it's like to translate your work. And then my second forthcoming pick is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. McQuiston's the author of the 2019 hit Red, White, and Royal Blue, which was like this huge romantic comedy phenomenon. And she is back with another romantic comedy. So Red, White, and Royal Blue was a love story that focused on the elite, but this one involves the other end of the socioeconomic spectrum. What is more working class, really, than the subway? So main character August has recently moved to New York and is hoping that this famously cynical city will prove her right that magical love stories don't exist for people that spend all day working hard for a living, which is what she does. She spends almost all her time working and commuting, which is where she meets Jane on the subway. And Jane is a beautiful, charismatic punk rocker. And, you know, the question is, how did Jane perfect her perfect old school punk rock look that seems authentic in every detail? Well, perhaps it's because she is a time traveler from the 1970s and magical love stories really do exist. So yeah, I love a good time travel romance. So I'm really looking forward to this one, especially since it will probably, you know, prove to be as funny as Red, White, and Royal Blue was. And this one is coming out June 1st. So I think it's going to be a really good poolside or vacation read, no matter, you know, what summer ends up looking like for us this year. So those are my picks. And next up we have Peggy. So take it away, Peggy.
All right, there I am. Hi, I'm Peggy from Saks. Welcome, everybody. My first book that I'm going to talk about is The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, and it's written by Marie Benedict. Marie Benedict picks the most interesting and intriguing women to write about. She's written about Hedy Lamarr and The Woman in the Room. Oh, it's the only woman in the room. Clementine Churchill and Lady Clementine, and Mileva Einstein and the other Einstein. But this is my favorite Marie Benedict book. It starts off with Agatha Miller meeting the dashing Archibald Christie. They date, romance ensues, and they get married. Well, years pass, marital bliss wanes, Archibald strays, and he asks for a divorce. He asked for the divorce in 1926, and at that time, Agatha Christie feigns her suicide and disappears for 11 days. And this is a real event that truly happened. The fun part of this book is what Marie Benedict imagined happens over those 11 days. I read this book without putting it down. I thought it was really engaging and a fun little mystery. I also want to say, I think this would be a great book club book. I actually think all the books I'm going to discuss today will be great book club books. So my next book is Hamnet, a novel of the plague, and it is by Maggie O'Farrell. Now, this is more of a story about Agnes Shakespeare and William Shakespeare. So I think the title is a bit of a misnomer, but that's okay. This is a great book. So the book starts off with Shakespeare as a hired tutor at the Hathaway farm, teaching Latin to the two boys. Shakespeare sees a beautiful woman who ends up being the boy's sister, and he pursues her. They fall in love, and according to the author, they act out hot blood, hot thoughts and hot deeds, all in an apple shed. Agnes is portrayed as a clairvoyant, and she foresees that Shakespeare has hidden talent and a higher purpose. So she marries him. So we're going to fast forward. They have twins, Hamnet and Judith. Hamnet is the precocious one, and Judith is your shy one. They grow to be 11 years old. And as you can guess by the title, the plague arrives. Well, Judith survives and Hamnet does not. The rest of the novel deals with Agnes's grief. So Shakespeare returns to London and his successful career as a playwright and an actor. And Agnes stays in Stratford-on-Avon and goes through her day-to-day life and feels like she's grieving alone. So time goes by and Agnes hears that Shakespeare has written a play called Hamlet. Now the author tells us that Hamlet and Hamnet are interchangeable names, I guess, like Peggy and Peg. Agnes wonders what on earth is this play about? And she's kind of in a dither. So she decides she's going to go to London to go see this play and see what it's about. She goes to the play, and during the play, she begins to understand that this is how Shakespeare was dealing with his grief. And so she gets this understanding and this feeling of peace. And so this is our happy ending for Agnes. I think this book was really well written and very intriguing. I think everybody likes to learn a little bit more about Shakespeare. Now, Maggie O'Farrell won an award for this book. It was a UK, United Kingdom award called the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2020, which is supposed to be very prestigious. So I think you will find that Hamnet is a very good book. Now, my next book is The Night Portrait, and it is by Laura Morelli. This is a World War II historical fiction. Now, you might say, oh no, not another World War II historical fiction, but there's more to this. The story revolves around 4 characters. There is Edith. She's a German and an art restorer. She is conscripted by the Nazis and sent to work for Hans Frank, who is called the Butcher of Poland. Then there is Dominic, an American, and he's an MP, and he's assigned to the Monuments Men. And everybody likes to read about the Monuments Men. Well, anyway, here's the more. The more is the other 2 characters are from the 15th century. There's Leonardo da Vinci, and he tells his story in the first person, which changes it up a little bit from the other 3 characters. And he talks about his life and his works. And then there is also Cecilia Gallerani, and she is the Duke of Milan's mistress. These 4 characters' lives in some way get entwined with this portrait. And as you can guess, this is a portrait of Cecilia Gallerani called Lady with an Ermine. I don't know if you guessed that part, but that's the title of it. And this portrait was done by Leonardo da Vinci. Edith discovers this picture behind a cemented in brick wall, and Hans Frank steals it, takes it to his home. And there is where Dominic finds it and informs the Monuments Men, who go and rescue it with the intent that all the artwork that was stolen by the Nazis will go back to their original owners. The writing goes back and forth between the four characters. I think the author does a really good job smoothly going back and forth across the years and between the characters. Sometimes this is hard to do, but Laura Morelli does a really good job of it. I think she also did a really good job in portraying the human struggles and the will to survive of these four characters. So anyway, you say, well, what about romance? Well, Edith has romance, check. Dominic has romance, check. Cecilia, not so much. And Leonardo, not so much. I really like historical fiction. I particularly like historical fiction that has art or an artist's work in it. So this was a really favorite book of mine. Just a little bit about Laura Morelli. She's an art historian. She wrote another book that received several awards called The Gondola Maker. I found her on, it's called TED Ed. So I guess it's a kind of TED Talk that has to do with education that was entitled Corruption, Wealth, and Beauty, the History of the Venetian Gondola. So I did happen to have a chance to watch it, but I'm looking forward to seeing that TED Talk. And now my next book is called Black Bottom Saints. It's by Alice Randall. This book makes me smile. Black Bottom is a place in Detroit. This book is about Ziggy Johnson, and he is on his deathbed telling his goddaughter, who he calls Colored Girl, about the saints that were in his life while he was in Black Bottom. So the romance in this book is how much Ziggy Johnson loved Black Bottom. He called it the Caramel Camelot. The book goes from the Great Depression, or Ziggy's stories about his saints go from the Great Depression through the 1950s. Ziggy Johnson is a real person. He was a gossip columnist, a dance teacher, and a nightclub MC. So it was through MCing at nightclubs and through his writing that he met many famous people and famous performers. This book is structured a little bit differently because there is a chapter on each one of his saints. So this book is like a Catholic books of saints, and Ziggy tells us about 52 of his saints, one for each week of the year. One thing about this book that I enjoyed was I learned a new vocabulary, and this vocabulary was Black slang. One of the terms that I learned was color struck. And in my little brief definition, I'll say it is prejudice in an Afro-American community based on skin color. Some of you might be familiar with that term if you've read the bestseller, The Vanishing Half. There was also a lot of other slang that I learned. Another thing, I had so much, and this is where my smile comes in, I had so much fun Googling the famous people in this book, a lot of which were performers that I've never heard of. So who you have heard of Ziggy's saints are probably Joe Louis, Nat King Cole, Della Reese. But the saints that I had never heard of were the Mills Brothers. They have a song on YouTube. It's called How Am I Doing? Hey, Hey. That's a great song. And then Ada Bricktop Smith, I hadn't heard of, and she's on YouTube singing the St. Louis Blues. And then I ran across a racier video of Butterbean and Susie. So the last thing I want to tell you about Black Bottom Saints is Alice Randall puts cocktail recipes at the end of each one of the chapters. I suppose it's kind of, here's a toast to you saints. The reason that they're there is Ziggy Johnson was friends with a bartender, and this bartender's name was Tom Bullock. And Tom Bullock wrote a book of cocktail recipes that kind of became the Bible for bartenders when they went to look for recipes. So for any of you that enjoy cocktails, this would be the icing on the cake of this book. I really enjoyed this book. I hope you'll like it too. My next book, this is a forthcoming book, and it's called The Personal Librarian. And you can see by the cover, this is also by Marie Benedict. I have the summary by Penguin, her publisher, and here it is. It says, in her 20s, Bella da Costa Green is hired by J.P. Morgan to curate a collection of rare manuscripts, books, and artwork for his newly built Pierpont Morgan Library. Belle becomes a fixture on the New York society scene and one of the most powerful people in the art and book world. But Belle has a secret, one she must protect at all cost. She was born not Belle de la Coste Green, but Belle Marion Greener. She's the daughter of Richard Greener, the first Black graduate of Harvard, and a well-known advocate for equality. Belle's complexion isn't dark because of her alleged Portuguese heritage that lets her pass as white. The Personal Librarian tells the story of an extraordinary woman famous for her intellect, style, and wit, and shares the lengths to which she must go for the protection of her family and her legacy to preserve her carefully crafted white identity in the racist world in which she lives. You can find this book, it's in the catalog. And if you would like to add your name to the list of holds, you can get on the list and wait for it to come out. And so here's my other forthcoming book. It's called The Harlem Shuffle. And I thought, oh, shuffle, that's like dancing. Maybe this is going to be like Black Bottom Saints, but it'll be in Harlem. So I was all psyched up. And then I read the review and figured out, no, it's not like Black Bottom Saints, but it is by two-time Pulitzer Prize winning author Colson Whitehead. So I'm thinking this is going to be a great book and I'm recommending it. So his publisher is also Penguin, and here's a synopsis from Penguin about the book. It says, to his customers and neighbors, Ray Carney is an upstanding salesman of reasonably priced furniture, making a decent life for himself and his family. Few people know he descends from a line of uptown hoods and crooks, and that his facade of normalcy has more than a few cracks in it, cracks that are getting bigger all the time. Cash is tight, especially with all those installment plan sofas. So if his cousin Freddie occasionally drops off the odd ring or necklace, Ray doesn't ask where it comes from. He knows a discreet jeweler downtown who doesn't ask questions either. Then Freddie falls in with a crew who plan to rob the Hotel Teresa and volunteers Ray's services as the fence. The heist doesn't go as planned. They rarely do. And now Ray has new clientele, one made up of shady cops, vicious local gangsters, two-bit pornographers, and other assorted Harlem lowlifes. Thus begins the internal tussle between Ray the striver and Ray the crook. Harlem Shuffle's ingenious story plays out in a beautifully recreated New York City of the early 1960s. It's a family saga masquerading as a crime novel, a hilarious morality play, a social novel about race and power, and ultimately a love letter to Harlem. Mostly, it's a joy to read. And this book is not going to be out until September the 14th. Next up is Lindsay from Saks.
Hi, everybody. My name's Lindsay, and I'm from the Saks branch, just like Peggy. And my first book I picked is called The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. And the wait list for this book is still pretty long, but I promise you it is worth the wait. I love this book. It's about a girl named Addie, and it starts in 1714 in France, and Addie's 23 years old. And she's about to be engaged to a man that she hates, and she doesn't want this. She wants to live her life and be free. So Addie goes into the forest and prays to the old gods for her freedom. And unfortunately for her, one of them listens, and it gives her what she wants. It turns her into an immortal, so she'll be 23 forever, but she's free from people because whoever meets her will forget about her completely. So no one ever remembers her after they speak to her. So she struggles for hundreds of years. So this book takes place in present time with flashbacks to the past of all the things she's done. And she names the old god that gave her this gift, Luke, and Luke is constantly following her around and trying to get her to join him. But in the present time, she goes into a bookstore to steal a book, and she's shocked when the bookstore owner recognizes her. So the story follows Henry, the bookstore owner, and Addie's life together with an amazing twist at the end. And I love this book. It is one of the best books that I read in 2020. The second book I picked is called The Two Lives of Lydia Bird by Josie Silver. And this is actually a Reese Witherspoon book club pick coming up. And this book was very different from the other ones that I read, and it's also very sad. It will break your heart, but it will put it back together again. So it's about a girl named Lydia, and in the first chapter, her fiance, Freddie, dies. He passes away very suddenly, and Lydia is devastated. And she realizes that when she's asleep in the dream world, that she sees the life she could have had with Freddie. And so she takes sleeping pills to try to sleep, to be with Freddie. And throughout this book, it switches from the awake point of view with Lydia in her dream world. And when she's awake, she spends all of her time with her best friend, her sister, and Freddie's best friend, Jonah. So she spends a lot of time with Jonah, and they share a lot of memories. They share their grief. And so as she spends her time with Freddie in the dream world, she starts to realize that maybe spending all your time in your dreams isn't exactly what you should be doing, that she should be living in the moment. And this book was so good. Now, it takes a lot for a book to make me cry, and I was bawling by the end of this book. It was so good, though. I recommend it to anybody who wants just a book you can finish in one sitting and a very quick read. I loved it. So my next two books are actually fantasy books, but both have romances in them. So the first one was recommended to me by my coworkers, and it's called Uprooted by Naomi Novik, and it's geared more towards new adults, so your main character is in her 20s. And it's about a girl named Agnieszka, and this is based off a Polish fairy tale. And Agnieszka and her best friend Kasia, they live in a very beautiful valley. They love it there, they're happy. And the only thing that brings a damper to their world is the woods surrounding their valley is cursed and filled with these dark creatures. And so the only thing that protects them in their little village is the wizard who calls himself the dragon. And he lives in a tower, and every 10 years, his payment for protecting the village is taking a woman from the village to work for him in his tower. And as the 10 years is coming up, Agnieszka knows that Kasia is going to be taken. And so she's worried for her friend, but her friend tells her not to worry. So when the dragon comes, it shocks everybody when he actually takes Agnieszka with him instead. And she learns more about herself than ever before, and learns she's so much more than the woodcutter's daughter. And she gets thrown into a war between good and evil with this wizard. This was an excellent book. Her writing is beautiful. I've read both of her books that are out now, and I recommend this one and Spinning Silver, her other one. And this one's my second fantasy book. This one's actually based on Russian fairy tales, and this is called The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. And I had read her middle grade fiction, so when I saw that she also wrote adult fiction, I checked this one out immediately, and it was amazing. She can paint the scene better than any author I've ever read. And this is about a girl named Vasa. And Vasa lives in a little village on the outskirts of a Russian village. And this book takes place in the winter time. And she grew up her whole life listening to fairy tales from her mother and her nursemaid. And she loves all of these stories of heroes and creatures and what lurks in the woods. And so when Vasa gets old enough to be married, she doesn't want this. She wants to travel. She wants to be a free spirit. So one night when her stepmother comes in, she realizes that Vasa is reading old fairy tales. So she sends her out into the night and Vasa runs away. And while she's out there, she meets an odd being. He's tall, he's dark, and he's freezing cold. And his name is Morozko, and he is the demon of frost. And he realizes something about Vasa, that she's different than most of the girls that he meets. So he gives her a gift and she returns home. So when her stepmother and father realize that she's been touched by this demon of frost, they kind of turn against her, and so does their village, because when things start going wrong in the village, they instantly look to Vasa and blame her. So this story is about her and Morozko teaming up to save her village, to save her. And this is actually book 1 in the series. I read this first book and then instantly read book 2 and 3, and book 3 was amazing. I give it 5 stars. And for my forthcoming books, this one comes out soon on February 9th. This is The Paris Library, and it's told in the point of view of a teenage girl named Lily, and through the point of view of Alida, her elderly neighbor who she's interviewing for a school project. And as she interviews Alida, Alida tells the story of how she was a librarian in Paris during World War II who joined the resistance, and then about all the romance she saw while she was in Paris, the betrayals that she saw during the war, and all of the friendships that she made that carried her through everything. This book really focuses on friendships, is what it looks like from the Kirkus review, and I cannot wait to read this one. My last one is a little darker than all the other books that I picked, and this one's more of a thriller. And it's about a girl named Abigail, and at her bachelorette party, she cheats on her fiance, Bruce, with a man she has never met before, and he did not give her his real name or really any information. So after this one night stand, she ends up getting married anyway to Bruce and doesn't tell him what happened. So after their beautiful wedding, they go on their honeymoon together. And while they're there, she starts to notice that the man that she had the one night stand with is following her around, and no one else seems to see him. So this book is about the decision of her telling Bruce what had happened or taking care of this stalker on her own. And so next up is Harry.
Thanks, Lindsay. I had the horror picks webinar, and I've got the mystery picks webinar coming up. So I've had a steady diet of creatures eating people, as well as murder, mayhem, and stalkers. That's why my picks are all straight up romances. My first book is Evie Drake Starts Over. This is a slow burn romance about a woman who is grieving. She's a widow, and she takes in a washed up Major League Baseball pitcher. His career is on the skids, so don't expect any explosions or fireworks in this book, but I think it is a realistic romance written by the author who is the host of the podcast, The Culture Happy Hour on NPR. I enjoyed the book. It's not explicit except for, there is some swearing in it, but it's not going to be as hot as some of my later picks. My second book is the Happy Ever After playlist. This book is about Sloane, who also is a widow, and she takes in a rescue dog who actually is owned by a rock musician who's on tour in Australia. Sloane tries to reach out to the musician to retrieve his dog and doesn't hear back from him. So she assumes that he's not interested and she adopts the dog. Of course, he comes back and he wants his dog back, and she doesn't want to give the dog back. This book is fast-paced, has sarcastic humor, explicit hotness, and heartbreak. But above all, it has a song attached to each chapter, which corresponds with what's going on in that chapter. My sister, who's younger than me and lives in Los Angeles, loved this book. I recommended it to her. I think this book is just outstanding. It's got a great combination of everything. My third book is Take a Hint, Danny Brown. I'm a huge fan of Talia Hibbert. Out of all these books, I would say this is the one that I laughed the hardest in reading. This is a hot book. One review on Amazon said, "My Kindle was smoking at times." This book has been on multiple best romances of 2020 lists, and I'll summarize the plot. Danica is a PhD student in London. She's outspoken, sassy, a woman of color, and bisexual. Zafir is a rugby player who works as a security guard at the complex where Danica lives. He's brooding and sensitive. And one day when he is out talking to Danica, just having a conversation with her, someone puts it on social media and people start speculating that this is his girlfriend. He is trying to promote a charity. And so this photo gets tagged with the charity and he starts to get a lot more likes. And they decide that they will fake date so that he can promote his charity. The book deals with mental health issues, but it has a happy ending and it is extremely funny. So if you like an explicit hot romance with a lot of humor, I recommend this book. My next book is The Switch by Beth O'Leary. This has to be made into a movie. Lena, a high-powered manager in England, is put on a 2-month sabbatical by her boss because she has a work-related collapse. Her sister has died of cancer. Lena can't concentrate. She botches a job. So she is told to go home, and she instead flees to her grandmother's village in rural England. Her grandmother, who is 80 years old, has just gotten divorced because her husband ran off with the aerobics instructor. The grandmother proposes that they switch residences. So grandma goes to live in London with Lena's housemates, and grandma decides to explore social media dating. Lena takes up grandma's activities in the village, like going to village meetings and meeting the locals. So you can imagine what kind of hilarity ensues, especially with the grandmother who's 80 years old and is now having to fend off numerous guys her age. This was a very funny book. It's a romantic comedy. You have alternating voices and it's heartwarming. So I would recommend this one. My next book is Second First Impressions by Sally Thorne. Her first book, The Hating Game, is being made into a movie. In this book, Teddy, who is a muscular, tattooed assistant to two 90-year-old women at this retirement home, he is the son of the owner of the property, and the owner wants to fix up the property and then flip it. Now, Teddy is kind of a ne'er-do-well. He's been a partier, and so his father gave him this job. And at the same time, there is a woman who works there, Ruthie, and Ruthie has been toiling at this retirement home for 6 years, has no social life, and boy, does she resent this guy who is the owner's son. So you can imagine that Ruthie, who is very devoted to this home and the residents, is going to run into conflict with the owner's son. I think it has a happy ending, but there may be some bumps on the road to getting there. My forthcoming book is The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. This is number 3 in her Kiss Quotient series. In this book, Quan is a slacker playboy who has been spurned by women until he becomes the CEO of a hot retail business. Now, all of a sudden, women are interested in him. Camilla rejected him in the past. Will she return to him? And what about her sister Anna? Poor Anna suffers from OCD, but she has always liked Quan. Will she and Quan be able to overcome their issues and get together? My final book, or it is my final book, so I will turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Harry. All right. So yeah, if this was not enough suggestions for you, if you need even more book suggestions, you might want to try out our personalized reading list service. This is a form you can fill out on our website where you tell us what you like and don't like. And in a week or less, we will send you a list of 5 titles that we think you might enjoy. You can find it on our website under the Books, E-Media, and More tab. And Harry has dropped the link into our chat box a couple of times as well. And we also wanted to highlight a few upcoming virtual programs that you may enjoy since you're all book lovers. In March, we have Mystery Picks for 2021. Harry will be running this program. He's going to look into his crystal ball and suggest that you read some forthcoming books that are coming out later in 2021 that are really, really good mysteries he thinks are going to be interesting. And then on Monday, March 15th at 7, I am hosting What Would She Read? I'm presenting along with 3 other presenters, and we are each picking a woman from history, and we'll talk about 1 book about her and 5 books that we think that she would read if she were alive today. So I think this is going to be a really fun one, and this is part of our Women's History Month celebration. So there are a lot of other really great Women's History Month programs, which you can find on our events calendar by doing a keyword search for women's history. Harry has also dropped the links to register for both of these programs in the chat box. And I just wanted to let you know that we have recorded today's program, and we have recently started recording a selection of our programs to post on the library's YouTube page. So if you want to watch this again, or you think that a friend or family member who wasn't able to attend today may enjoy this, please direct them to our YouTube channel. I will include a link to that channel in the follow-up email to this program, which I'll send to all of you tomorrow, probably tomorrow afternoon. And that also will include the handouts in case you didn't get the handouts earlier today. So yeah, so keep an eye out for that. We usually post the programs within about 3 business days of when we hosted the program. So look for it later this week. All right, so Harry's been monitoring the chat. I don't know if all of our presenters want to turn your cameras and microphones on. Harry, did we have any questions in the chat?
Sarah, I saw one question asking for a Regency romance recommendation, and I put in 10 Things I Hate About the Duke by Loretta Chase.
Yeah, I can't remember all of the titles off the top of my head. Harry and I have had a lot of book programs recently, so we've had to talk about a lot of books. But maybe 2 weeks ago, I put together a social media post that was inspired by Bridgerton for the library. So if you follow the library on Instagram and you go back a couple weeks, you will see that post. And it had, I think, 6 Regency romances in it, including the one that Harry just talked about. Because I don't know if you all know, but Bridgerton is based on a book series, but it currently has a very long hold list. But there are a lot of other really fun Regency romances out there, and the ones in the list I put together are all kind of have that steaminess and that humor that Bridgerton has. So yeah, check those out. Any other questions?
Sarah, can I put in a plug for a program?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
I call my book discussion group Novel Awakening. And we are meeting February 11th at 1 o'clock on Zoom. And we are reading Mrs. Jessie James. We're fortunate enough to have the author who's going to come in and visit with us. So you all are more than welcome to come and join us.
Awesome. Thanks, Peggy. I have to say one of the upsides to the pandemic and having all of these virtual programs is that, like, no matter where you live in the St. Louis area, or maybe even outside of the St. Louis area, you can attend Peggy's book group,
Yes.
which in normal times meets in person at the Saks branch in Chesterfield, but now meets online, so anyone can come. Yeah. Anything you want to plug, Lindsay?
Youth librarian at Saks. So if you need kids books or you need activities for your kids, you can come get them here. We have STEAM and activity kits or book bundles and personalized book bundles. I love pulling books for kids, especially kids who don't like reading. One of my favorite things to do is to help them find that book that gets them started.
Yeah, I hope everyone knows this by now, but although browsing is currently restricted, you can fill out a form on our website. It's under the curbside section called book bundles. And the staff at the branch of your choice will pull together a selection of books off the shelf based on kind of what you tell us that you're interested in. It's a really nice service, and then you can just pick them up curbside. So yeah. Any other questions come in, Harry?
No.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you especially to Lindsay and Peggy for taking time out of your really, really busy branch schedule to present with us today. I hope everyone is now in the mood for Valentine's Day and thinking about love and relationships. And like I said, keep an eye out for the follow-up email that'll come out tomorrow. I'll have the handouts in there as well as a link to the library's YouTube page. So yeah, our program has ended. We're all going to turn off our cameras and our microphones, but I will leave the program running for just a few more minutes in case there is information you want to copy out of the chat, or if you want to copy down our email address if you have questions for us. But everyone have a great afternoon, and we'll see you in March.